Today on Future Cities Africa, I talk with Dr. Marco Macagnano, the Smart Cities leader at Deloitte Consulting. Marco holds over 14 years of experience leading architectural design and project delivery across most sectors. Marco, welcome. I hope I didn't mess up your last name. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but please tell us a bit more about your background and your work at Deloitte Consulting.
Yeah, perfect. No, thanks very much. You did pretty well. And trust me, I've heard every iteration under the sun. Yes, so you're correct. I hold approximately 14 years of experience in professional practice as an architect before joining Deloitte. And I was fortunate enough to work in most sectors of the industry, from commercial, mixed-use, retail, residential, institutional buildings, etc. So it gave me a good basis for understanding the market from cradle to grave. So when it comes to conceptualizing or thinking about what a building, a precinct, or a city needs to be, to the point of actually delivering and then forward into operations. And I brought that sensibility with me into Deloitte, following the completion of my PhD in smart and sustainable built environments for the information age, where I also developed an integrated systems design methodology for implementation. And really what they're focused on is understanding that the built environment has changed. It's no longer what it used to be as a series of fixed structures or destinations that we go to work or to live, but rather these are living elements within a systems approach or within a system. They're information generators, they are thinking environments that exist not just to support us, but to enable us. And that really is the premise around what smart real estate is geared towards. It's creating built environments that enable us to be better, enable us to work better, to live better, and essentially become an intrinsic component of our everyday living and working experience and quality of life.
So with that in mind, you recently moved into your new African head offices at Waterfall City. What's that been like?
Yes, so it came at an interesting point in our lives, didn't it? We had in fact opened the doors unofficially towards the beginning of this year, where we started to trickle in our staff in a phased move-in process. And that came at the time when, of course, we all know the pandemic hit, right? So fortunately, I got a few weeks of work in our new building, and I must say it was quite an incredible experience. However, we now are presented with a new normal. And it presented us with the realization that the design processes that preceded us opening the doors could never have foreseen the situation we find ourselves in today. And fortunately for us, we had embarked upon a process of converting what was, you could call it a traditional P-grade office building into a smart building. And we did so at the beginning of last year. We embarked upon that process. With the realization that this space needs to be, as I've referred to previously, an enabling environment and a space that is centered around providing a next generation workplace, an enabling space for our workforce. And we instituted a number of key processes into the building to create a system that could think for itself, which we've been fortunately able to leverage going into this now reopening of the economy. And by creating a building that could think for itself based upon a platform that allows for rapid scalability and very deep data analytics, we're able to take advantage of the digital infrastructure that we had designed and implemented to create a much more resilient environment for us to re-enter. So fortunately for us, we thought digitally, we thought ahead, and we thought about using data to our advantage, which meant that we could easily pivot. And now we've got a space that when we're back up to what I can only assume will be a version of full speed, that we can sequence the way in which people use the space, where we can make sure that people are centralizing their efforts, when to go in relative to the type of work you need to do and the type of the team you need to coordinate with. We can look at real-time spatial density analysis linked to work and office shifts. So it's a very, very intelligent system, leveraging technologies that we had implemented just from the point of view that we wanted to understand how we're using our space better. And that's really the beauty of a smart building solution, is that we could create these capabilities without having to invest anything more.
It's been called the smartest building in Africa. Firstly, what makes it the smartest building in Africa? And secondly, can you highlight some of the key smart features? You mentioned some smart technologies, but are there one or two or three key technologies that stand out?
Right. So yeah, it's a good point you make. So the smartest building in Africa, and I think it comes down to the question: how do you define smart? So who's in control of that definition? And to be honest, it's a term that's been appropriated by many in industry and often incorrectly so. So what we did at Deloitte was we actually defined what smart means. We've created a number of key criteria that allow us to quantifiably score a level of smartness, not just for our building, but also for the buildings that we deliver the service to in industry, to meet our expectations in terms of what we want our building to do. And there's a number of ways that you can unpack what smart is. For some, smart means having a building that is very clever in terms of facilities management. It means having a green building. For others, smart is about a building that understands how it uses its space and can optimize on that. And then for others, it's about how smart can be an enabling environment to allow workforce to conduct their day-to-day more safely and more with greater productivity and efficiency than ever before. And there's kind of a pyramidal approach that we take in defining that. So we start at the very bottom when it comes to infrastructural outlay, saying that's a connected building. Then when it comes to having a building that's capable of using its data to analytics or to a reasonable degree of analytics, then we talk about an automated building. But for it to be truly smart, you're talking about a building that actually succeeds on the engagement layer, that provides a space that can help me be better at doing my job. And if it's not doing that, if it's not engaging the people on the ground, if it's not making the office space a better office space, then it's not smart. So when we say we've got a smart building, it's because our people can work better, it's because they're better engaged, and because they're able to work more safely. And we've created an information feedback loop within the building that means once I go in and I operate a certain way, the building learns from me how I've worked, and it makes suggestions in the future as to how I could work better. So it's continually optimizing its processes. And being energy efficient and being on point when it comes to facilities management are all key components of that, but they only scratch the surface. So we really wanted to take it to the next level about how do we add better business resilience, better sustainability to operations, and really what are we doing to augment the way our business runs, not just where it works. So some of the key features I should mention, I think you asked, we have a building that is capable of analyzing how it's occupied right down to about 30 centimeters squared, which is quite granular. And for us, it was important because we want to know who's sitting where, how often are they in that position. If someone's productivity is recorded as being low, is it because someone was standing behind their shoulder and interrupting them? Maybe they need to work somewhere different. So it's about really understanding behavioral characteristics based on occupancy sensing. And we've done that from the point of view of not just anonymized data, so warm bodies in space, because we want to protect people's personal information. But if a person were to let us understand and track where they go and what they need, we can really get down to what their personalized and individual requirements are and shape their experience of the space accordingly. Then we've got things like, for example, utilizing that technology, we can see the exact density of different areas within the space. So if, for example, social distancing risks are exceeded above a certain threshold, we can actually issue an instruction to people to disperse or to occupy different areas of the building based on the work they need to do. And then we're using this technology to actually develop real-time deep data analytics. Now, this building was designed in, say, 2015, 2016. It takes about 5 years for a building to get out of the ground. But if you consider that in the future of work, 50% of jobs in 5 years' time haven't been invented yet, how then can we possibly expect that a building that was designed 5 years ago would be exactly what we needed today and would see us through to the end of our 10-year lease? It's impossible. So we need a building that can actually continue to self-diagnose, so that if we, for example, have under or overemphasized meeting room space or collaboration areas, we're actually letting the data tell us that. And we can then create a real estate strategy for adaptation over time, so that we can always make sure that the workspace we need to get best productivity out of our staff is provided for. And then we can do cool things like see what the waiting time at the canteen is, and plan my journey down there so I don't have to spend time unnecessarily waiting for my sandwich. And other great things like navigate to a boardroom based on who I'm meeting and what kind of a space I need. So indoor GPS, or find a friend so I can tell someone where I am so they can come to me. And that's all based through or enabled through location-based services. And then we can also get into granular detail about who's visiting us, what type of business units are performing better than others, and does the getting or signing more deals directly correlate to people visiting us more or less often, and all sorts of interesting granular detail that really I don't think we've unpacked the depth that we can get to, but that's the beauty. And by putting this on the cloud and by making our building what we call serverless, it means that we can take advantage of all the power of Amazon Web Services, who provide 3 new services a day, which means in 1 year time we'll be able to do 1,000 new things with the building without having to change any cables or putting in any new.
If it means no queuing at the canteen, sign me up. I'm ready. So you are the Smart Cities lead at Deloitte. What does a smart city mean in an African context?
It's a very good question. Now, smart city is not a single definition. It doesn't apply equitably across even just different cities within a single country. It has to be very much approached as a design process based on its context of application. So if we think about an African context, there are tremendous differences between one side of a country to the other, between different parts of even one city. And really the only way to deal with that most appropriately in an African context is, above all others, is to take a human-centric approach. We have to understand what it is that we're trying to deliver on the ground as a service to our people, as a way to engage our citizens, and as a way to get the economy thriving on the back of a city that is actually supporting infrastructure. So a smart city is not about the technology you provide. It's not about fiber networks being laid and cables being placed everywhere we go. It's about processes, and it's about strategic frameworks. It's about a design initiative. And then it's about creating key interventions based on the infrastructure you have at hand in order to generate the maximum amount of benefit. So if someone says to me, if I want to create a new smart city in Johannesburg, I would say start with the infrastructure we have and create the best use cases that we can from that, leveraging the data to its maximum degree possible. And do so in a way that allows for future scalability. Now, when I say scalability, what I mean is the ability of a solution to actually become upgraded over time with minimum effort. Then that can only happen with a top-down design approach. What are we trying to achieve? Who are we trying to benefit? What are the existing constraints and opportunities? And then you design the technology stack and support, not the other way around. And I think that's a general misconception in the market, is that a smart city starts with the technology, and then we go from there. That's the backwards approach. And that's how money gets unfortunately wasted and how projects are unfortunately made unsuccessful. So there are also some important considerations to be taken in Africa context around socioeconomic development and culture. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So if I were to talk about what makes a smart city in Africa work, it's about creating an engagement platform. And a platform is basically a digital environment that allows for the introduction of data from a variety of omni-channel sources, we call it, from a variety of points of view and sources, including our people on the ground, as well as IoT, as well as news, as well as social media, whatever we can get our hands on, and then disseminating that information back into services. And that central point of visibility is absolutely critical. So if we're not thinking or taking a long-term view about what does it mean in terms of 5 years, 10 years, and a 15-year journey, and taking into consideration the fact that our biggest and the most important generator of information is the people on the ground, then I don't think a smart city concept in Africa is well-founded. And then, of course, the technology stack is developed and supported.
How do we ensure that these smarter and sustainable cities benefit everyone and not only the few?
So in order to solve for a problem, you need to understand that problem. And that's why I say it's important not to jump ahead to the solution or to the technology. Because what you need to really unpack and understand are what are the success factors that go into determining whether we're on the right track or the wrong track. What are the levers we need to pull in order to create the right conditions for something to be implemented successfully? So defining the metrics for success are key. And in order to define the metrics for success, we need deep stakeholder engagement. And when I say stakeholder engagement, it's those that are responsible for the operations and the management of the city, and it's the citizens themselves. And of course, then you've got the ecosystem of technology providers or service providers and the ecosystem, etc. But there needs to be a very deliberate and thought out process. To, for example, say we need a safe city solution, and then to rush out and buy smart cameras is perhaps a missed opportunity. What we need to do is to unpack what makes a safe city safe? What are the key criteria that go into understanding how people feel safe in an environment? What are the major indicators for a lack of safety? What are the types of data points that are available to us in order to quantify whether something is or isn't safe, and then filling in the gaps, and then defining a strategy of operations to support that. Having data is not an answer to a problem, but it's how you use that and how you augment and enable behavior. And what's interesting is we find taking the cue from maybe some other countries around the world, where, for example, they would want to introduce a system to make a space more safe or more pleasurable. It's not just about introducing tech, but it's about creating the conditions for people to actually occupy that space differently and to be enabled in a different way around their behavior. So if I'm made to feel like I need to look after my people around me, or I'm feeling a bit more engaged, or there's a higher level of social surveillance, that creates a safe environment. I don't need to go in and have drones flying everywhere in order to solve that problem. It's about enabling or augmenting behavior. And you can only really get to that by deep stakeholder engagement.
So we're living in an era of, in many cases, some would say forced rapid digitization. What key technologies do you see emerging from this current environment?
So one of the key issues around the prevalence of increased digitization is, of course, the problem of big data. We now have a situation where there are more IoT devices on the planet than there are human beings, capable of generating gigabytes of data every day. So what do you do in a situation where we're almost drowning in information? And for me, the biggest issue is, what are we doing with that information? How are we directing it most appropriately? So the key drivers that I see in helping us manage that process going forward are things like cloud computing, edge-based computing devices, as well as the prevalence and increasing importance of things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. So if I were to unpack those very simply, a cloud computing solution really refers to being able to aggregate data from a variety of sources into a single point that you don't actually own, right? So it exists in an environment that is supported by a third party. So it could be Amazon, it could be Google, it could be Microsoft. And what they're doing is they're creating an engine of processing power that allows you to port your information into that, and you can run all sorts of process analytics and investigation onto the data without needing to invest upfront capital in having those computers yourselves, or the cybersecurity of those systems, or even the maintenance of those systems. So it really unlocks a new potential for businesses and cities to be able to leverage those massive supercomputers that exist somewhere else. I mean, we can have access to them on a pay-as-you-go basis. So I only pay for the information that I'm processing when I'm processing it. So this unlocked incredible potential. And then linked to that, the cloud computing capability, we can start to add different analytical processes, such as, for example, if I stitched in a camera feed from a city street, I could unlock facial recognition, which was otherwise not possible when it was originally installed. And what we're doing is we're just turning data into an actionable insight. And the second component is edge computing, where now consider that there's a camera that can distribute terabytes of information at any given moment in time, or over the course of 1 hour. That's a lot of information that's to travel between data centers and back to the point where we need to introduce that change or effect to that insight. So we're looking at devices that are actually capable of doing a lot of the analytics at the point of source, and thereby making the amount of data that's being transferred as minimal as possible, so it reduces the operating cost. And then artificial intelligence and machine learning, what that's essentially referring to is the ability of our processes, our computing power to learn and to adjust, and really to mitigate the repetitive roles that would otherwise fall upon a human being in a control center, whereby we then unlock that human being to take more active decision-making arranged around what do we do with an insight. So artificial intelligence will be applied to, for example, CCTV camera, to be able to either do some facial recognition or some proximity sensing, so people are getting too close in a high-risk COVID environment. Then that makes it possible for the human being to then act upon that information. Otherwise, before that happened, a human being would have to watch the CCTV camera and wait for people to get too close to each other before saying something was wrong. We remove that issue out of the process, and it means that we can get more accurate and more punctual about our response as and when it occurs. We spoke about some of the major technologies that are going to be impactful. The one thing I didn't touch on, the future of the digital twin, is something that I think needs to be considered as well. It's the ability to create a virtualized and digital version of reality that exists for the point of view of not just allowing someone to see what is happening and where, creating a 3D model of a city and linking it to the notification of incidents, a traffic jam or a car accident or a crime, and seeing these blips occur around the city. But really what we're talking about when we mention a digital twin is the ability to understand the downstream impacts of that. So if there's a traffic jam, does it mean there's going to be an impact on emergency services to get to certain locations within the city? Does it mean that waste collection is going to be impacted? Does it mean that bus transport routes are going to be delayed? And then to institute a situation or a framework of delivering information to all of those downstream impacted parties and stakeholders so that we can take corrective measures before they become a problem. And the other thing that I think is important to note about a digital twin, that it allows for scenario planning. So what if a skyscraper were to be built on the site? What if that residential tower were to be half occupied? Or what if there was to be a fire in this area? What if we converted all roofs of our buildings to create solar powered energy? At the moment, it's difficult to actually hypothesize what the impact of something like that might be. But a digital twin allows for that scenario planning. Even from the point of view of when you leverage artificial intelligence, you can create the equivalent of thousands of scenarios in a single hour. And it would allow then our cities, both private and public cities and own precincts, to really get ahead of problems and to fine tune their response well ahead of the problem. In fact, we could have used a digital twin even to understand what the impact of work from home might be on our cities. With regards to traffic, with regards to CO2 emissions, with regards to the provision of services and even electrical capacity. That could have been done. So a digital twin essentially unlocks the potential for us to not just react to what we call the new normal today, but to hypothesize any number of situations so that we can prepare ourselves for the next normal.
So definitely a lot of opportunities. I'm sure we can all agree African cities do have unique challenges to secure a bright future for its citizens. If you have to choose the biggest challenge that must be overcome, what would that challenge be?
The digital divide, definitely. The fact that there are the information have and have-nots. We've seen in many countries around the world that access to the internet is starting to become a human right. Just as you would expect access to clean water and electricity. So access to information is essentially, and access to the internet and access to data is essentially the biggest issue that we need to circumvent. And unfortunately, that comes with certain constraints right now in providing data to people so that they can become connected, so they can benefit from this amazing ecosystem of insights generation and connectivity. There needs to be some supporting infrastructure. But it's interesting to note that our conversation now comes in the context of companies like SpaceX that are sending satellites up into our orbit on a daily basis in order to beam low-cost, if not free, internet to every corner of our planet. So the issue of infrastructure is becoming, within our lifetime, in fact, well within our lifetime, maybe inside of the next 5 years, a non-issue. You're looking at mandates being handed down to reduce the cost of data in our country as well. So I definitely see if we look at the next 10 years in Africa, and in fact, even in South Africa, there's going to be a major shift. And as people get more access to information, it means that we can actually incorporate them into a system of engagement. It's not just about having information, but it's about creating an environment where we enable our citizens. And when I talk about engagement, I mean, it's not just me having an app in my hand that tells me when the bus is coming, but it's the app actually suggesting to me, based on my schedule in the day, which bus I need to take, or if there's a queue, when to go and catch that bus, who I'm catching the bus with, whether or not I need to stop on the way to work and to pick up something that's in my shopping list. It helps me get the most out of my day. And then based upon the inputs that I'm putting back into that system, from my behavior, from my experiences, then that whole system learns about the way I want to conduct myself, and then it changes my routines or makes suggestions about my routines so that I can improve my day tomorrow. And that's engagement. And we're turning then our citizens into our best generators of information, because essentially we want to make sure that the benefits are felt at a personal level, a human level.
And your vision about the future of African cities, has it been changed by this current environment? Is the outlook scary? Is it exciting?
So I'm an eternal optimist. The future is very positive. Um, what I find is going to be interesting is conversations around information and conversations around data are more and more prevalent on a daily basis. How do we get the most out of our information? And I think it's inevitable that our cities are going to become something of an open source environment. And what I mean by that is at the moment you'll find that data exists in silos. So a building that maybe a smart building is able to understand how it works and understand what it needs to do as a building in order to be better tomorrow. But everything outside of that envelope is invisible, right? To it, everything that exists outside can't see what the building is doing itself. So what we're talking about then is I see that there's going to be a future where there's going to be a prevalence for data sharing to occur between public and private sector, because the more that we all understand about the environments that we occupy, the better that we can update our day-to-day processes, the more that we can become more intelligent about how we need to use our spaces, both outside and inside of buildings. And I see the municipalities as taking a role of custodianship of that, where they essentially become the platform into which everything connects, and therefore will unlock a capability within to take a more active and real-time approach to town planning and special development frameworks, to focus developments around areas that are in need of socio-economic development, or take advantage of areas that are showing an uptick in economic activity, and focus attention, or say, for example, make a suggestion around the residential development in an area that actually needs it, as opposed to an aged town planning framework that is perhaps 5-10 years old and now obsolete. So I see the future dashboard of a smart city as being a top-down vision of a city where buildings are glowing green and red, saying this one's performing well and that one isn't. There's a traffic jam here which is leading to downstream impacts on other services, so we can get ahead of service delivery before it becomes a problem, rather than only when something starts to go wrong. And right now, we've actually got all the tools to make that happen. We just need to make sure that people understand the benefits of sharing their data.
And finally, you mentioned a common vision for future cities to get to that common goal. What advice would you have for sector stakeholders to work together to build this future together?
So I think collectively we are stronger. There needs to be a reinvention of our concept of what constitutes intellectual property. It's not a problem for a building owner, for example, to share that their building is either using too much or too little electricity, or over or under occupied, because what that allows a city to do is to take more decisions around what they can do to support that particular development. It's not a go-it-alone scenario anymore. The more that we can come together and share our information, the more that we can create a system of active support. And that's essentially a role that I think our municipalities can take very powerfully. It makes the idea of being a citizen and of paying our rates to belong to a city and to have access to services beyond just the basic services of I want to make sure I've got water and electricity coming to my building. But then the concept of receiving a service is linked to business intelligence. It's linked to quality of life metrics. And it's linked to suggestions around what we can do to make our environments more sustainable and more equitable. So we need to remove the silos. We need to look at a more aggregated environment. And for our municipalities, that means defining a smart city strategy that looks at standardization of information sharing protocols, and even perhaps incentivizing or rewarding the information sharing amongst its private sector and other stakeholders, so that we can all collectively win.